Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I apologise, I think this video is probably going to be a little late today, so apologies for that. It may go out on time. If it has, huzzah, but I don't think it's going to. Today I wanted to look at something which is perhaps a topic that not many people have thought about. Maybe they have, I don't know. And that is what upgrades to give to your units. Now, one of the things I love about Black Powder is that the units themselves are fairly generic. They are, some of you will have heard me use this analogy more often than you'd like to think. They are the rice pudding. Okay, a British infantryman is the same as a French infantryman, is the same as a Russian, is the same as an Austrian. And that's because we're not playing fantasy here. It's not orcs versus elves versus demons versus orcs. Everyone is a human, so they're all basically the same. But they have different traits which make them better in some areas or perhaps worse in other areas. So, for instance, the British, they have just a normal stat line, but they have first fire, so they get an extra shot the first time they fire. The Russians, they have a special rule that gives them +1 to their stamina, so they have stamina 4 infantry. The Austrians, they have the special rule that lets them fire 2 shots at point blank range. So, all with them, that's more of, well, that's the theme of today's video. We'll come into that later on. And the French, of course, they get the pas de charge as well as some other things. So, you're starting off from the same base, and it's worth looking at what upgrades you can have. Now, I'm thinking about this because I've recently done the Ottoman army book. So, I've been thinking about this quite a lot. Now, one of the things I did with the Ottoman points list is I changed the amount of points an upgrade was depending on the unit size. Now, this is not something that Black Powder does in general, and I think it's a mistake that they've made because sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it isn't. So if we're going to look into what I want to look at today is we'll look at the upgrades that different units can take, and I'll basically give my opinion of whether I think it's worth it or not. So the first one that we'll come up with is, in my opinion, an absolute no-brainer. This is one that if you have the option to take it. Now, I should also say as well that I'm talking about points games here. If you are doing a scenario or something like that, then you need to pick the special rules that fit your scenario. So, for instance, if a unit, fought to the last man in this historical battle, let's say you're doing the Battle of Berezina, then you would give the Swiss stubborn, because the Swiss fought and died to the last man there. If you are doing the Battle of Talavera, you might want to give the Spanish either freshly raised, or you might want to give them wavering, something like that, to represent the brigade that quit the field, allegedly due to the sound of their own musket fire, which I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what the people at the time said. So by and large, if you are doing a scenario or you are putting together an army that you have researched the history for yourself, while this video is relevant to you, it's not hugely, because add the pluses and minuses, the advantages and disadvantages, the bonuses and penalties, add them that would fit the scenario and the troops that you're using. So, sorry, I'm going to, with that caveat out of the way, let's get back into it. So, the first one I was going to look at is Tough Fighter. Now, I've got two things to say on this one. The first one is, if you're going as per the rules, always take it. Absolutely always take Tough Fighter. It is a point, and it lets you re-roll the dice in hand-to-hand combat. Even if that unit never gets into hand-to-hand combat and it costs you a point more than it normally would, you'll never notice. That's absolutely fine. Go large, Tough Fighter all the way, baby. For 1 point, you can't overlook it. Now, I've changed that in the Under Eagles to Glory to be 5 points for a regular-sized unit, 7 points for a large unit. Now, this is a little bit interesting because we'll talk about the maths a bit later on, but the reroll on a for now, you'll just have to take my word for it, a reroll on a large unit is less valuable than a reroll on a small unit. Again, we'll talk about it in a bit. And this means that you're paying an extra premium to put it on a large unit. Now, that's not by mistake, that is by design. The idea is that if you want to have large units, then in the Under Eagles to Glory pack, you are going to have to pay an extra premium for any bonuses that you want. So I'm trying to limit the amount of large units that people want to take if they want them to be elite. The way I see it is that it's almost like they've taken their, they may have started off as a large battalion, but the casualties they've taken along the way and the experience they've gained that now makes them tough fighter means that they only count as a regular sized unit. I would say when you're paying 5 points to upgrade a unit to tough fighters, I would suggest that is a choice at this point. When it's a single point, go large, go crazy. When it's 5 points or 7 points, then it can be a little bit more of a question. And that was what I brought it in for. I didn't want it to be an auto-include. So, tough fighter, if it's only costing you a point, go large. If it's going to be using the Under Eagles to Glory pack, you might want to have a think on that one. Now, I mentioned stubborn in the sidebar when I was talking about your scenarios. Stubborn, I think, is a great rule. Now, it is quite expensive, certainly compared to tough fighters. And it's also very rare, but I would suggest that you spring for it where available. Particularly in this case, I think it's the opposite. If you have a large unit, then it's definitely better. And the better the saving throw, the better the more you shall get out of that stubborn. So I would suggest that if it's available to you, then you go for the stubborn. Now, one thing that is a little bit more, what should we say, a little bit more subjective, I think, is whether you upgrade your battalions or your regiments to veteran. Now, veteran it brings a suite of rules. It gives you reliable and an elite number. Now, if I'm looking at the 100 days one here. I'm looking at the French. They get veteran elite 5+ for 6 points, or reliable elite 4+ for 8 points. Now, I would suggest with this one that it depends on what you want your battalions to do, or in fact, to be honest, what you want your army to be doing. If you are an aggressive commander, if you want to be attacking the enemy, then it is possibly worth going for. If you are a defensive player, you probably need it less. I would also suggest as well that I probably wouldn't go for it across the whole army either. Those points, they will add up over time. And I think you are going to be wanting a particular brigade to be the tip of the spear. They're going to be your assault brigade. So I would put it on those guys. On the support brigades, I probably wouldn't bother too much. Now, cavalry can also get this rule as well. And I would 100% put it on cavalry where possible. Probably the 5-up one, although realistically you're probably just best off going for the best one that's available to you. And that is because the infantry, if they are disordered, they can still contribute. They can still fire. Now, they're at -1, but a lot of the time you're fishing for 6s anyway. So the fact they're hitting on 4s or 5s doesn't really make any difference because it's the 6s that you're after. Cavalry, if they are not moving, they are not doing anything at all. They don't have any shooting attacks. All right, you might get a bow shot from your Cossacks or something like that. But realistically, they're not doing anything if they're not moving. So you need to make sure that they can keep moving. And the best way of doing that is not to get them shot in the first place. The second best way of that is to try and mitigate any disorders that they have. It's also really important as well that you can undisorder your units when it comes to rallying casualties off as well. Remember, you cannot issue an order to a disordered unit. So if you get rid of that disorder at the start of the turn, by the time it comes around to the command phase, you can then try and rally that point of damage off them. So elite 5+, elite 4+, I would say very optional, but you probably want it some in your army. That could be either intrinsic to your guard units, or it could be that you pay for some veteran line troops. So again, if you're the French, you could look at something like you could say they're the Vistula Legion, or the Swiss, to use them as an example from earlier on. Or if you're another nation, you can use them as sort of grenadiers or guard, something like that. I mean, not necessarily officially guard, but you know, a pseudo guard unit. Or the Brits, you could just class them as being, as the name suggests, a veteran unit. Particularly if you're doing, for argument's sake, 1812, then you could say that they're a unit that's been shipped over from the peninsula and now they're fighting in America. That did happen. The Kings had a battalion that fought in both. So, yeah, that's where I would go with the veteran. Yes, on infantry some of the time. Yes, on cavalry as often as possible. I should also say as well that the cavalry get +1 attack when they take that option. So it is an absolute no-brainer there. You are looking at... I'm looking at the French light cavalry. A Hussar regiment is 41 points. For an extra 6 points, you can give them a 7th attack, and they get... they get the reliable instead of the elite. So I still think it's worth it, though. I would still go for it on the cavalry as often as possible. Now, I've just seen another upgrade that the British can take now. I hadn't noticed this before, that the British Highlanders can take ferocious charge. Now, this is going to be, hold it onto your hats, this one, guys. It's going to be a huge 3 points. 3 points for ferocious charge on Highlanders. Now, that is, in fairness, in addition to their points in the first place. So I'm just having a look here. British Infantry Brigades. So they are a battalion. They are 39 points, +1 for Highlanders, +3 for ferocious charge. That is absolutely insanicals. That is off the chain good. Possibly the best upgrade in the game. I'm going to call it here, guys. I'm going to say it. Why am I so excited? Why am I glazing myself about this? Well, it comes down to a combination of rules. Now, ferocious charge is basically what the British cavalry have, and it's something that I've had to try and nerf into the ground as much as possible because it's very, very strong. It allows them to reroll all fails to hit in the first round of combat. But there is a caveat. You must count as charging in order to have that special rule. So, okay, fair enough. Now, with cavalry, that's okay because you can countercharge with cavalry, so you can be guaranteed that 80% of the time you're going to be charging every time. And that's unless there's a bit of breakthrough move and you get caught standing. That's fine. That's great. That's what makes the British cavalry so powerful. However, infantry can't countercharge because if they get charged, they get caught flat. No countercharging for them. Unless, of course, you're British, because they can countercharge. They have the steady line special rule, which means that they can either stand and fire at closing enemies with the usual +1 to hit, or they can eschew that +1 to hit, and they can counter charging in close combat. Now, normally that means they hit on 3s. So that's pretty good. You got 6 attacks hitting on 3s, you're going to get 4 hits. Happy days. Now, the Jocks, they will reroll 1s, so they should reroll their 1 miss, and they'll probably get a hit on that one. And with the ferocious charge, they get to reroll any fails hit, so they would get to reroll that. They would get to reroll that 2 as well. So it's only 1 reroll. I hear you saying it's worth 3 points. Is it really that good? Well, yes, it is, because we're going to move now on to the sizes of your units. And you can make the Highlanders a large battalion. Now, to be fair, this would not be historically inaccurate. Scottish battalions were traditionally very, very well manned. They weren't any larger than English battalions. The battalion strength was still 1,000 men, and the Scottish battalions wouldn't get to 1,000 men either. But they would get a lot higher they get a lot closer than the English regiment. So I'm thinking at something like Fuentes d'Onoro. The Argyll and Southern Highlanders mustered around about 800 men in their battalion. I think it was 860, but I could be wrong on that one. But it's 800 and something anyway. And most battalions are running between 300 and 400. So they were double the size of most English battalions. You can absolutely justify a Highlander battalion being large. So that gives them 8 attacks. Now, suddenly you're looking at 2 to 3 misses that you're re-rolling with those extra ferocious charge points. I think it's an absolute no-brainer. I just absolutely off the chain good. When possible, if you have the option to take ferocious charge on your units, absolutely do so. And that's also a unit that you want to be looking to make large. Now, what other units would you want to be making large? One of the problems with large is that it gives you a lot of points in one place, but it's still only one activation. And what I mean by that is, if you have a large unit, let's say you could make it extra large or super large. Let's say super large. You know, you could say, yep, I've got this battalion here. It's got 12 attacks in close combat. It's got 6 shots. It's got a stamina of 6 as well. It's absolutely incredible. If that unit gets disordered, then it can't do anything for the whole turn. And that's that huge unit of, or that number of resources that are doing nothing because you've rolled 1-6. If you had 2 units, then your opponent would have to roll 2 6s to disorder them both. And of course, they would be able to support each other in close combat. So bigger is not always better when it comes to units in Black Powder. That said, a large Austrian unit is super scary, and that's because they get the double dice for firing at point blank range. 5 dice, you are almost guaranteed that you're going to get a disorder on the enemy. It's not 100. It's not 100%, but it is over 85% that you are going to get a 6. So there is that. Also, it allows you to add to your stamina. The Russians, they can have large units as well, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's a terrible idea. That gives them a stamina of 5 if they're a large unit. That is pretty gnarly. They also have 8 attacks in close combat, and they're re-rolling their 1s. Additionally, it gives them a 4th shot, which means that when they get their -1 to hit, they can actually start competing with, say, French when it comes to a firefight. Probably not the British before they've used their first fire, but afterwards it means that they can start to balance each other out. So Russians, Austrians, I would absolutely say go large. Giggity. The French, yes, as well. That 4th stamina when you're in column of attack is pretty tasty. And because you're in column of attack, you are using quite a relatively small amount of real estate. The British, I would urge caution against going large with them. I think you're better off with multiple medium units than you are just 1 or 2 larger units. That's because you will get more use out of the first fire. If you've got, say, 2 large units, you get 8 shots, which goes up to 10 shots on the first round of fire. You only get 1 extra one, doesn't matter how large your units are. If you've got 3 medium-sized units instead of the 2 large ones, you've got 9 shots, so you've got 1 extra shot. And when you do your first fire, you've got 12 shots, so you'll have 2 more than the first fire in large battalions. So for the Brits, I wouldn't necessarily go with large. There's also the fact that because you're going to want to be in line, you are going to be taking up a huge amount of real estate. So watch out for that as well. It means that units that get pushed back, suddenly you can have a huge gap in your line. That's not usually a good thing. Unless, of course, you have ferocious charge Highlanders, in which case you absolutely want to go large. Cavalry-wise, I would suggest that you probably don't need to go large, but you could do if you had another bonus. So for argument's sake, you've got those hussars, those veteran hussars with an extra attack. That takes you from 6 to 7 attacks. A large unit takes you up to 9 attacks. Suddenly, that unit of hussars is competing with cuirassiers or dragoons. You're probably still going to lose to cuirassiers because they've got the heavy cavalry and the 3-up save. But, you're going to do some damage at least. Now, the flip side to go large is to go fun-sized and go small. Now, you can normally make your units cheaper by doing this. I think it's usually -8 points if you want to go small. Now, this is an interesting one. Why would you choose to go small? Well, it's to do with the how you build brigades, basically. So, because you have a brigade of a certain number of units, you will probably want to keep some back. Because if you lose half of your units, then that brigade is broken. Now, it doesn't matter how good that brigade is. If it's broken, it's broken. So if you have the Coldstream Guards and they are brigaded with 2 units of militia and those militia get destroyed, then the Coldstream Guards ain't doing anything for the rest of the game apart from retreating off the table. So for that reason, you might want to minimize the amount of exposure that unit has. So for argument's sake, the guard, well, the guard's not a great example, but let's say you're going to take a battalion of French line infantry. You're going to be like, right, I want to build this brigade so it's as survivable as possible, and it's got some hardcore elite units in there. So you say, right, I'm going to have 3 battalions of veteran 4+ large battalions of Swiss, as an example. So you put them in. Now, the problem is, if you lose 2 of those battalions, then your brigade is broken, the third one's going to run away, and you've wasted all of those points. So what you can do is you can have maybe a unit of just cheap troops, make them small, make them wavering. We'll talk about wavering later. Stick them at the back. They don't get involved in the fight, but it does mean that the enemy, under my rules, has to destroy all 3 of those Swiss battalions in order to break that brigade. And then once the brigade's broken, the unit that hasn't really cost you many points, they're going to flee off the field, but it means that you've got the most efficiency out of those points. You're only going to lose, say, a 20-point unit when you're broken, as opposed to the 40 or 50-point unit if you didn't take these wavering dudes. So that is where you might want to take small. It's where you might want to take wavering as well. Other than that, and to be historically accurate, I don't really know why you would take a small unit, to be honest. It's not my bag, baby. It's not something that I would necessarily go for. You're all right, okay, you're saving points. I guess, again, it could, if you've got something like First Fire, we mentioned earlier on that you're best having 3 medium-sized units than 2 large ones, and you'll be better off having 5 small units over 3 medium units. So there is that, I suppose. But for me, you're making your army a bit too fragile there. When I'm looking at units that are small, I'm suddenly looking at my hussars and thinking they can probably take them quite easily. Cavalry, I would never do it if given the option. Now, some of the cavalry units are small anyway. Things like the Mamelukes, if you take those in your Spanish book, or your Free Cossacks, they're going to be small as well. I don't think I'd ever buy a small unit of cavalry, and that's because they can only do stuff in close combat. Now, one thing you could say with small units of cavalry is they might be useful for forcing the enemy into square and pinning them there. But the problem is, in order to pin the enemy into a square, you've got to be within 18 inches, which means you're within musket range, and if you've only got a stamina of 2, which a small unit will do, then you're not going to be pinning that square for very long. So it's a tough one. I would suggest, unless you're doing it for gamey reasons or historical reasons, I can't see why you would want to get a rebate on your troops to make them small. I don't know. And we're going to talk about wavering. Similar to that, you are massively increasing the likelihood of your troops running away by taking wavering. So that means every time they take a casualty, they will take a morale test. And unfortunately, it means that you're tripling your chances of running away, basically. Now, you only fail if you roll a 4 or less. So I'm just going to do some quick maths in my brain. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 outcomes out of 36 that are going to be a break. So, unless you're disordered as well. But let's just go with the 7 out of 36. So that is 1 in 5.5-ish times you are going to run away. Now, you're going to have to roll that 3 times because you've got a stamina of 3. So, I mean, you're asking to run away, really. I think wavering is a very, very bad rule. Unless I were doing something historical, I can't see why I would ever try and get a refund on points for it. I'd rather just have 3 solid units than 4 very shaky units. For me, wavering is a never include. Unless, of course, as I say, you're doing it for historical reasons. In which case, yeah, absolutely, go large. It's a fun rule, but it's not one that I would enjoy. Speaking of fun rules that I do enjoy, however, freshly raised. Now, this is actually an interesting one because you pay points so it's technically an upgrade, but it can make your troops a lot worse. Now, I absolutely love Fresh Raised. I use it far more than I should. So I'm going to say from a gameplay perspective, Freshly Raised can be quite good because it can give you the extra bonus if you roll a 6. If you roll a 1, however, it's not so good. So it depends on how much chaos you like in your army. If you're an Orc or Goblin player, then you should absolutely go Freshly Raised. In fact, make your entire army Freshly Raised. But if you're an Elf player, if you prefer your dudes to do what they're told, then I would probably give Freshly Raised a miss. Although I absolutely love it. I think it's such good fun. Another nega trait, you could say, is unreliable. Now, I'm not a huge fan of unreliable, I have to say. It does mean that your troops are far less likely to actually do what you tell them to do. But that said, as the game goes on, that becomes less important because you then start to use initiative moves. I would say for infantry, particularly if you are on a defensive status, if you're Russians, for argument's sake, then unreliable is not necessarily the worst rule in the world because you can overcome it with their Great Patriotic War special, which gives them +1 to their charge orders, or just be within 12 of the enemy and charge them anyway that way. So I would suggest that is a little bit more situational. For cavalry, it's a big no-no. For me, cavalry are interesting. In fact, I'll talk about this now. I wasn't going to mention strategy ratings, but I'm going to. I would say 8 is roughly where you want to be, but that's including modifiers. So, for instance, if you've got the pas de charge, you've effectively got +2 to your order rolls. So, you can have a strategy rating 7-1 easy enough. If you're wanting to charge, the British cavalry, for argument's sake, they get +1. Now, for cavalry, I would tend to go strategy rate 8 minimum, plus the any bonuses you get on top of that. So that would make the British strategy rating 9 if they want to charge. And they've got a decent charge. I mean, that's an average of a 36-inch charge there. So that's pretty tasty. So I would tend to go with strategy rating 7, where possible. 8 if you are going to be a cavalry commander. The French can absolutely get by with just 7s. They have an effective strategy rating of 9 when they're commanding infantry then. Cavalry, though, I would make an 8. And unreliable effectively minuses 1 from your strategy rating. So you've got to think, if you've paid 25 points for a commander, you can get a rebate by making individual units harder to order, but that is going to make any brigade orders more difficult as well. So if you have one unreliable unit in your brigade of 4, then the other 3 are not getting the points rebate, but they are paying for the unreliable units -1 to command, effectively. It means if you roll your command value, it counts as a fail. So I would say unreliable, where you can avoid it, avoid it. If it's historically accurate, keep it in. But I would say that for argument's sake, unreliable would be a great rule for an 1805 army of the 5th Coalition, to represent the difficulty of moving orders between the Russians and the Austrians. I think that would be a good, elegant way of doing that. But in general, I would say avoid the nega traits. Just keep the posi traits as much as possible. That would be my overarching advice when you are putting together a points-based army list, such as for Under Eagles to Glory. But that is it today. I wanted to keep it fairly short. I just wanted to go quickly through the ups and downs of the various upgrades and downgrades. By and large, some upgrades I go for the situational, whether it's infantry, cavalry, or what army it is. But by and large, if you can get tough fighter, if you get ferocious charge, absolutely go for it. If you can get stubborn or veteran, it's probably worth sprinkling it through your army. If you can get large, I would probably go for it now and then. One thing that I quickly mentioned this before we go, is that I said that the tough fighter is better on a small unit than a large unit. That is because the reroll is as a percentage of your dice higher, the fewer the dice you roll. You only get 1 dice to reroll. If you're throwing, say, 4 dice, that means you get to reroll 25% of your attack dice. If you roll 8 dice, then you get to reroll 12.5% of your attack dice. So the fewer dice you roll, the more important the rerolls are. And that's where something like a company of riflemen really comes into their own, because they're only throwing 1 or 2 dice, and because they're sharpshooters, they get to reroll. I should have mentioned sharpshooters, I haven't. I think it's a great rule, definitely worth having. If you can upgrade your French line into lights, I would definitely recommend that you go for that. Something like riflemen, they have it built in. And again, if you've modelled someone as light infantry, say you've done the, I don't know, Ox and Bucks light infantry, give them sharpshooters as well. Why not, I say. But there you go, that is today's video. Sorry, it's a little bit brief, it's a little bit short, a little bit quiet as well. I've got quite a gruff voice. I don't know what's going on with my throat. Something very unpleasant. But I hope your weekend has been more pleasant than my throat. I hope you're all doing well, and I shall see you guys next week.